Hello, my name is Pooja. Welcome to the Sunday special episode of Around the World. When Russia invaded Ukraine about 10 months ago, then anyone would have hardly imagined that this war would go on for so long. However, the war is still far from over, and it is extremely difficult to say when this war will come to an end. But as long as this war continues, it will continue to affect the world. It is also true that the effects of war do not remain confined to its immediate geographical areas only. The effects of war are felt throughout the world. In today's episode, we will try to understand how the ongoing war in Europe is increasing the concerns of Southeast Asian countries. Actually, the Southeast Asian countries or ASEAN countries have various concerns ranging from security to food supply. On the other hand, the South China Sea dispute is likely to deepen further, and on the other hand, ASEAN countries are dependent on Europe for several food items. ASEAN countries are major importers of European goods, but the Ukraine crisis has hindered the import of goods from Europe. However, ASEAN countries are not openly opposing Russia. Singapore and Indonesia are the only two countries that have openly opposed Russia. Against this backdrop, several pertinent questions arise. First, what are the concerns of the ASEAN countries in view of the Ukraine crisis? Second, why ASEAN countries are linking the South China Sea dispute with the Ukraine crisis? Third, why ASEAN countries are not openly opposing Russia? But first of all, let us know about Southeast Asian region. Southeast Asia is the geographic southeast region of Asia that lies south of mainland China. It lies in the east of the Indian subcontinent and northwest of Australia. Southeast Asia is surrounded by East Asia to the north, South Asia and Bay of Bengal to the west, Oceania and the Pacific Ocean to the east, and Australia and the Indian Ocean to the south. 10 countries of this region, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar and Cambodia together form the ASEAN group. The South China Sea is located in Southeast Asia, and the ASEAN countries are concerned about China's aggressive activities and aggressive attitude in the South China Sea. Actually, many Southeast Asian countries depend on imports of essential goods from Russia and Ukraine. In 2020, ASEAN countries imported 9.7% of their fertilizer supplies from Russia and 9.2% of grain from Ukraine. But these countries have faced a shortage of supplies in the last 10 months. Consequently, basic services like transportation and electricity in these countries have been adversely affected. According to the World Bank, the global prices of energy have increased by 50% and the food prices have increased by 20% due to the Ukraine crisis in 2022. Its effect was also felt in the ASEAN countries. The inflation rate for ASEAN as a group has increased from 3.1% in 2021 to 4.7% in 2022. Rising commodity prices are hindering Southeast Asian countries' recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, and this hindrance could increase the risk of political and economic instability. Indonesia may have to bear the maximum brunt of this hindrance as it imports 25% of its grain from Russia and Ukraine, also imports about 50% of its fertilizers from Russia and Belarus. Notably, the Russia-Ukraine war is being fought between Russia and Ukraine, and Belarus is the neighbor of both Ukraine and Russia. In such a scenario, the hindrance in the movement in war has increased concerns in Indonesia. It implies that the Russia-Ukraine war has increased the concerns about food security in this region. On the other hand, ASEAN countries are also concerned about the South China Sea dispute. They are of the view that if Russia succeeds in achieving its goals in Ukraine, then China's aggressive activities in South China Sea region might also increase. They hold that the pre-war situation in Ukraine matches the prevailing situation in the South China Sea. Hence, they fear that China may forcibly try to change the status quo in the South China Sea. Now, the question remains, what is the South China Sea dispute? Actually, Japan occupied the entire area of the South China Sea from 1939 to 1945. After the defeat of Japan in 1949, China sent its naval warships into the South China Sea to recapture it, and succeeded in doing so. When the Communist Party of China formed the government in the present-day China, then it issued a map. After the map was released, the real South China Sea dispute started. By drawing some lines on the map, China asserted its rights over a large part that is, about 3 million square kilometers of South China Sea. China has also claimed almost all the islands located in South China Sea as its own, as 9 virtual lines were drawn on the map to show China's part of the South China Sea. Therefore, these lines are called the 9-dash lines. This part of the South China Sea lying between Indonesia and Vietnam is spread over about 3.5 million square kilometers. There are about 250 small and big islands in this part of the South China Sea, and almost all the islands are uninhabited. This area of the South China Sea is located between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean and is surrounded by China, Taiwan, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and the Philippines. Except for Indonesia, all other countries consider some part of South China Sea as their own. Vietnam's Spratly and Paracel Islands come within the 9-dash line due to China's claim on the South China Sea. Therefore, China asserts its rights over these islands, and it has led to a dispute between China and Vietnam. Similarly, China also claims that the Scarborough Shoal Island of the Philippines fall under the 9-dash line. It's because of China's dominance that most ASEAN countries strongly support international law and the United Nations Charter. Singapore believes that the world will become a dangerous place for small countries if the principle of might is right prevails in international relations. But the question remains whether all ASEAN countries share the same opinion. Actually, all ASEAN countries do not share the same opinion, as some ASEAN countries are considering Russia's attack as a threat, but some ASEAN countries think the other way. When the resolution against Russia was introduced in the United Nations General Assembly, then 2 ASEAN countries, namely Laos and Vietnam, abstained from the voting. It is believed that Laos and Vietnam are historical partners of Russia. It implies that ASEAN countries have different views on their concerns and problems. Therefore, Southeast Asia is dominated by both the US and Russia due to the differences of opinion between the ASEAN countries. In other words, the ASEAN countries also seem to be divided into 2 camps. This is also one of the reasons why some ASEAN countries are not openly opposing the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In addition, Russia is the 9th largest trading partner of ASEAN. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russia is the largest arms supplier in the Southeast Asia region. On the other hand, a section of Southeast Asian politicians considers Putin a strong leader. They believe that Russia has challenged the US-led world order. Therefore, Russia has the potential to challenge the US in global politics. For all these reasons, many leaders of Southeast Asia did not criticize Russia. However, the global community should unitedly put pressure on Russia so that any kind of humanitarian crises can be avoided in ASEAN countries. Now we come to the next segment of the Sunday special episode of Around the World. In this segment, we will talk about other significant international news. A meeting of the United Nations Security Council was convened recently. During this meeting, India's permanent representative, Ruchira Kamboj, stated that there is a special need to maintain peace and stability in Afghanistan. Therefore, the international community should collectively make efforts in this direction. She further stated that India will continue to play its role in achieving this objective. The interests of the Afghan people have always been at the core of Indian efforts. Hence, India is closely monitoring the security situation in Afghanistan. India is also actively engaged with the international community on issues which are related to Afghanistan. Israel has once again carried out airstrikes in Syria. According to the Syrian army, Israel carried out airstrikes near Damascus, the capital of Syria, in the early hours of 20th December 2022. Apart from physical damage, 2 Syrian soldiers were injured in these airstrikes. According to Syria, Israel carried out similar airstrikes in the previous month as well. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights stated that 3 non-Syrian civilians were also killed in the Israeli airstrike. However, it is being said that these civilians killed were linked to the Iran-backed Lebanese terrorist group Hezbollah. Recently, a German court convicted a 97-year-old woman of murder in more than 10,000 cases. The court found her guilty of her role as secretary to the commander of the Nazis' Stutthof concentration camp during World War II. The woman was alleged to have assisted the camp commander in the systematic murder of prisoners in camp between June 1943 and April 1945. Interestingly, the case was tried in a juvenile court, as she was less than 21 years of age at the time of alleged offences. North Korea has threatened to take tough and decisive military measures against Japan. North Korea issued this warning after Japan adopted the National Security Strategy. North Korea views this strategy as an attempt to turn Japan into an aggressive military power. A spokesperson of one of the ministries of North Korea has stated that Japan is building up its military offensive capability under the pretext of self-defense rights, and it can neither be considered appropriate nor it is acceptable. He further accused Japan of undermining regional peace. Notably, Japan views North Korea as the biggest threat to its national security. North Korea's nuclear-tipped missiles are a major security concerns for Japan. These nuclear missiles are capable of reaching Japan as well as South Korea and the US. That's all in this episode. Let us note down the question based on today's story. How has the Russia-Ukraine war affected the ASEAN countries? Analyze.